Today on the bench we have a Radio Shack model TRC-485. This is a AM sideband radio. They're kind of, I don't know if I'd want to say rare, because I have a couple of them myself. This is a customer's radio. Was sent in for no power on lower sideband. Actually, I found very little power, like in probably a few milliwatts. Very, very low power in upper sideband, and AM, the power, then again the power was cranked up in this, but the AM carrier was fine, but it had very little modulation. And I'll get into some of the repairs, what I did there. They're nice little radios. I guess these were probably the replacement for the TRC-465s. Personally, I prefer the 465s. Not so much the board, though they are, in my opinion, a little bit better performers, especially on receive. But serviceability in the future. The 465 used a standard PLL chip. This is microprocessor controlled. So, and it's a custom chip. So, if the microprocessors ever go out in one of these, you're just SOL. There's no other way other than find a parts rig, which they're hard to find in the first place, so the odds of you finding a parts rig are going to be even harder. So, that's one thing to keep in mind. It doesn't, there are, well, basically, I guess one unobtainium part. Well, actually two, the display, if you'd ever have a problem with the display, because unlike the 465 that just had a two-channel, a two-digit, 7-segment display, this uses an LCD display. So again, if it ever goes bad, you're going to be kind of shit out of luck. Now, actually, let me turn it off, get everything unplugged here, or at least somewhat. This one had, apparently at some point in time, had modifications done to it. So here's the processor down here. It's marked SY201. This radio, it's not the same by no means, but it's very, very similar to the Radio Shack HT, oh God, what the hell is that, HTX10, I think, 10-meter radio. But they use a SY, and like I say, this is all it's just a custom IC. It's actually an LC73, I gotta pull the service manual out here to even remember. 72322, there we go. So there it is, right there. It's just custom, custom programmed, and then also custom labeled for them, so you can see SY201. I think the HTX10s have like a 202 in them, possibly, or something like that. It's a different number they have printed on the IC, though. This one apparently had a channel modification. These can be expanded for extra channels. This one, I'm assuming, was done and then undone, because it does not have extra channels right now. It's a stock radio. Clarifier's locked, channel mod is, which I don't think the clarifier had ever been unlocked before, but it looks like just by some of the soldering on some of these pins here, you can see it's a little bit blobby there. Someone had probably done a channel mod, or tried maybe, and couldn't get it to work, I don't know. But, so, it's a stock radio as it sits right now, and I'm done with it other than putting the covers on it. So, like I say, I had to do some repairs to this. It had some weird output power problems, and what that ended up being was, someone had, again, done some, because this has had some work done to it. Bunch of, I'm assuming, probably solder joints reflowed, because they're just large areas underneath here that pretty much they just hit every pin. Maybe in shotgun attempt to try and fix it. Which I'm going to assume they fixed that, because it wouldn't transmit at all if you were having problems, oscillator, PLL circuit problems. But someone had replaced the driver. It obviously was not original, because originally this had green Loctite on the screw, and there was red Loctite on the transistor that was in there, and it looked to have been used. So, like I say, it had red Loctite on it. First giveaway was a used component. Second thing was the leads were so short. It looked like it came out of a radio where it was circuit board mounted, So the leads weren't long enough to get up or down around the board and wrap down like they're supposed to be bent over and then soldered. So, but what I actually found was, I think it's what is that? It'll be easier to look at the board layout diagram here and try and get my head down in there. R40, 140, yeah, hell, 145 it looks like. But it's part of the bias circuit for this, and actually see there's some new components. There's 2 new resistors and a new trimmer resistor. This resistor just plain had a hole burned in the side of it, but the trimmer had a bad spot. Also, it looked like it was an open framing like this, where you can actually see the carbon, resistance material in there. It looked like it got really hot, so I'm assuming maybe the original final had burned up, and it took out a few components here. Something failed somewhere in this circuit, probably the driver, and took out a few of the supporting components. I stuck in a new. Now, the first thing I did was took the driver transistor out, tested it on a curve tracer, and yes, it was low. It had low gain, so I put a new 2SC2166 in it, and it was a little better, but it was still low. Oop, and I turned the volume down there. Sideband power was still low. It did come up, and AM power picked up. Actually, AM power picked up a little bit more, but modulation was still pretty much, I'm not going to say non-existent, but there wasn't much there. So a little bit more troubleshooting. That's when I noticed voltages weren't right here, and I could not adjust the bias current. Now these, I hate that they do this to these. Most radios that have these boards, they just push in. They're push-in terminals. Now they came from the factory like this, soldered on, but yeah, they're push-in terminals. You really don't need to solder them, but it already had solder on there, so when I installed the board again, the test point terminals here were already soldered, but I could not get the driver bias adjusted properly. Originally, with the original transistor in there, I could only get microamps. Not milliamps, microamps. A couple microamps to go through that thing. When I installed the new one, it got me up to maybe 5 milliamps. Still obviously a huge problem, because the bias current on the driver is supposed to be, I think it's like 65 milliamps, and I think it's 70 on the final. So like I say, I got to doing a little bit more diagnostics. That's when I found a few of those problems. So those are reinstalled. The white goop you see on there, or the bias diodes, they originally were glued with a really hard glue to the directly to the face of both of those transistors. Both of them were pulled out. So you could see, yeah, someone had been in here. And I'm not going to try and chip that glue off of that diode for fear of breaking it, because it is a glass diode. So what you see, that white stuff on there, is thermal heat transfer compound. Sets up really, really slow. Honestly, it takes days for that stuff to completely dry. But so I put some of that on there, so that will give it good thermal bond to the transistors. After I did that, everything was fine. Sideband power came back. AM power went way up, because like I say, the AM power was cranked up, and modulation returned on AM. So that's about it. Now, one thing I did replace all the electrolytic capacitors. If you ever do one of these, and it's not just this radio, but there are a few radios you will run into when you're replacing electrolytic capacitors. They're not polarized. They're bipolar or non-polarized capacitors. They are not electrolytic. They look exactly like all the other caps in this radio. I've actually had a few radios sent to me over the years where someone recapped their own radio, and it was working, maybe fine before they just wanted to recap it, or, it was having some problems, and they got done recapping it, and then it didn't work anymore. And they're like, what the hell is going on? Send it to me, and I find a polarized electrolytic capacitor in place of just a capacitor, which is bipolar or non-polarized. And this is actually the one that was removed out of the radio. So the easy way to tell, well, there's two easy ways to tell. If you look at any electrolytic capacitor, a polarized electrolytic capacitor always has the polarity marked on it. Now, radios older than this, Occasionally you'll find where they have the positive marked for polarity on the cap. 90, probably 5+% of the time, especially all modern capacitors. But some of the old ones, like I say, had the positive, but the majority of them are going to have the negative. So let me just reach down and grab a big one here, easier to demonstrate with this. You can see negative signs. So, and if it has negative signs, or in the case of it's a really old one, one of those oddball ones, it might have the positives marked on the other side and not the negative. But if you see markings like that, either negative signs or positive signs, indicating the one terminal, it's electrolytic. It's polarized electrolytic. If it's not, there's not going to be, just like this one, there's no polarized markings on this. But what there is, let me find it here. Oh, where in the hell is it at? Right there. Right underneath of the temperature. See that inside that little box? It says BP. That is not a manufacturer's marking. That's not, the brand or the, series of capacitor. What BP stands for is bipolar, meaning it's non-polarized. The polarity is the same, either direction. So just be sure, and this one was this one right here. So it only had one, but that, like I say, some radios have a lot of them in them. Some of the old radios from like the late 70s, early 80s, you'll occasionally run into one that might have a half dozen or a dozen non-polarized caps, but just something to keep in mind. Some radios do have that. Other than that, not a lot to these little things. I mean, they are kind of nice little radios. I mean, like I say, I like the 465s a little bit better. Older design. Like I say, has a true PLL chip in it that can still be gotten. So if it goes out, it can be replaced. But otherwise, nice little radios. Now, I will say on these, if you did do a channel expansion on these, that's another reason I kind of don't like radios like this. If someone does do a channel expansion, it's not reflected in the frequency display here. You'll have 40 channels. When you go to your extra bank of channels or whatever, if you're on channel 19, it's still going to show 27.185. So, yeah, it's just it's not a frequency counter. Okay? I think people mistake that as being a frequency counter. It's not. It's just a frequency display. That chip that's right behind the display here on the board, it knows that when this says 19, this needs to say 27.185. Another kind of easy way to tell is, if you turn the clarifier to full lock in one direction or the other, the display doesn't change at all. So it's not taking live measurements. It's just programmed. When it says 19, it needs to show 27.185. When it says 40, it should show 27.405, and so on. But it has a dual watch, scan, last channel recall, channel 9 mode, which for AM upper and lower sideband, and a noise blanker. There is no ANL on this, or automatic noise limiter on-off on this. It does have the circuitry, it's just basically on all the time. Other than that, standard controls, volume on-off, clarifier, RF gain, channel selector, your squelch, and this also acts as it's an on-off switch, so that acts as the CB PA switch. So, there you go. One other thing I kind of, again, don't like about this, it's not a big killer for it, but the power cord, yeah, as you can see, it's permanently attached to the radio. I prefer radios that have a socket in the back, because it's just so much easier to, if your cord gets damaged, mouse chews on it, your dog chews on it, whatever, or, and I've seen cords that get shorter and shorter and shorter, and you get radios like this, sometimes you'll see there's like 1-inch stubs sticking out the back of the radio, or if it just had a socket, if your power cord got damaged, you'd just plug in a new cord and be on your way. But like I say, otherwise they're nice little radios, very similar in layout to the 465s, but yes, definitely different radios, because like I say, microprocessor controlled. Oh, and one other thing, this does not have a 10.240 crystal. It has two crystals. There's a 10.69, is that 75, I think? Yes, 10.6975. Most people would be assuming when they look in this radio and go, that must mean that's the 10.240. Nope. You would be correct to think that one would normally be your 10.240, but this radio does not use that. That is actually a 4.5 megahertz crystal. And that's, got to remember, microprocessor controlled doesn't have a dedicated PLL chip down here. But yeah, it uses a kind of an oddball frequency there. So it's, like I say, it's got a 4.5 megahertz in there. But so there you go. There's just a fixed up little radio, ready to be put back into service. Got good output power now. And I guess that pretty much covers it. And nope, I'm not done. As soon as I hit stop, I was like, aha, there was one thing I wanted to mention. Please do not contact me asking me for the service manual, because I did say, and you've seen me grabbing this book over here, yes, I have a service manual for it. I don't know what gives about this radio. Apparently, there's, well, at least what from you look online, I've never had a problem. I've always had the service manual, but I've had people contact me over time, and I just had one very recently contacted me. Said, I've got one of these radios. I spent like 3 hours and something online looking, and there is no published service manual for this. Bullshit. Pardon my French, but bullshit. It's right here. I've got it. TRC-485 is a 21-1577. Radio Shack made a service manual on me, but you know, it's the full service manual. And actually, Radio Shack, I've got to give them credit. When they made a service manual, they made a good service manual. Had full specifications, not one of those little things about that's all the information you get. I mean, a full receiver section. You can see all of these are receiver sensitivity tests and measurements. You know, good alignment procedures. You know, board layouts and whatnot. Another nice thing I like about their manuals is they have voltage measurements. Very important when you're doing troubleshooting. So you can see they have pages and pages of component identification, voltage measurements, you know, the schematic, the actual schematic for it. Yeah, it's across 2 pages. But now, if you need this, I just recently scanned the manual. Actually, this isn't the one, my original copy of it. This is, of course, is a copy of my original. But I had that in a file. I sent that to Def Palm and Buddy at the radio shop for both of them to put them up on their website. So if you need the TRC-485 factory service manual that apparently no one can find, I have basically donated a digital copy of that to Def Palm, so you can go to Def Palm's website. Scott's going to, I don't know when he'll get that up, and same thing with Buddy, the radio shop. So if you go to his website. But both of them have a copy of it. I don't have a website, so I don't have anywhere to publish this kind of shit. If CB Tricks was still CB Tricks and you could donate shit to them, I would have emailed it to them so they could put it on their website, because that is the go-to place for, you know, repository of service manuals for CBs. But yeah, CB Tricks is pretty much dying. It's, you know, I guess it's on its final leg of dying. Eventually it's just going to go away, which is a shame. But I know there are some people out there trying to back up, you know, a lot of the files on that. I've got it on DVD, you know, the entire site on DVD. But yeah, so like I say, 2 other guys that have websites, they're going to be sticking this up on their site. So I mean, actually, by the time this video gets out, Lord knows when I'll get this video published. They'll probably have this up on their websites by then. But so now you don't have to use that HTX 10 book and kind of go, yeah, it's kind of the same, but no, it's different, and measurements are going to be different, chips are, yeah, it's just, the manual's out there, people. Just look for one of those 2 guys' sites, and they should be able to hook you up. You know, you won't even have to contact them. Like I say, you can just go to their site and download it. But so, like I said, I wanted to add that, because just to save myself, I get so many emails, I can't even come close to answering all of them as it is. Last thing I need is an influx of 100 emails asking for copies of this service manual. So that's where it can be found now.